It is June 23rd, 2025, and I'm recording this at about 1:30 p.m. local time here in Texas as it's being reported that Iran has launched retaliatory strikes targeting a U.S. military base in Qatar. Reports are saying that Iran did give Qatar a heads up that the country was able to close off its airspace ahead of time and to really get air defense in place in order to respond. You've also got anonymous White House officials telling CNN that the Trump administration was anticipating these retaliatory attacks, saying that they had similar responses after the U.S. assassinated Iranian General Qasem Soleimani during Trump's first term back in 2020. So is this the extent of Iran's retaliation? Are we going to see the US respond with yet another attack? And what does this mean for the overall conflict as we continue to see Iran and Israel target each other? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Jim Jatras, a geopolitical analyst and former U.S. diplomat. Jim, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Well, thank you, Rachel, for having me on.
Always good to talk to you. Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. We have Al Jazeera reporting that Iranian state media is saying that an attack has begun on U.S. bases in Qatar and Iraq. Now, this, of course, comes just a couple of days after the U.S. carried out direct strikes targeting nuclear facilities in Iran. We've heard from Iran that they were going to respond, but it's also important to note that reports are saying that Iran coordinated the attacks on the U.S. base in Qatar with Qatari officials providing advance notice to minimize casualties, and that they notably used 42 missiles, the same number as the U.S. missiles that were used against the Iranian nuclear sites in their initial attack. So how do you view the fact that we appear to be seeing a response from Iran targeting these U.S. bases?
Well, if you accept the theory, which is increasingly likely, that the U.S. strike on Iran's nuclear facilities was choreographed and that they were expecting it, and we knew it was empty, we knew we weren't going to do any real damage to anything, and then the U.S. is telling the Iranians not to shoot back, my first thought was, is this an Israeli false flag? Are they trying to make sure there can be no stand down between the United States and Iraq? Now, if it looks like the Iranians are confirming these strikes, but it appears, at least from the first reports, we haven't heard any reports of casualties or any real damage to these bases. Maybe this is just another, okay, you made a tag on our side, now we're going to tag you back, and it's all kind of a big kabuki dance so that each side can come out and say, okay, we won. We left our calling card, the other side back down. If that's all that's really going on with between Washington and Tehran, we can count ourselves lucky so far. If that indicates that the United States and Iran don't want to mix it up into a real war with each other, this would be an indication.
Yeah, and it's been interesting because I know that everyone has kind of been watching and waiting to see how Iran will respond, if they would respond, and if they would target these US bases. But as you're noting there, I mean, if they're calling Qatar saying, hey, we're going to carry out this attack, Qatar has time to shut down their airspace, to then make sure that they have air defense ready to go. It seems as though they were able to target these incoming missiles and shoot them down, then that kind of puts us in a space where it's like, okay, can we breathe for a second, right? Are you still concerned about increasing escalations, or like you were saying, Israel potentially coming in and saying, no, this isn't good enough, and doing something to provoke a wider, more escalated war?
Exactly right. And of course, remember, Trump said after our strike on Iran, they better not respond. Now, if this was also coordinated with the Iranians, maybe that comment goes by the wayside. But remember, what's still on the table from Trump's side is still amounts to regime change, unconditional surrender, and so on and so forth. Have they taken the talk about killing the supreme leader off the table? I mean, I don't know that we're out of the woods yet in terms of what the political demands from the United States are, which frankly, I do not buy. This is all about nuclear weapons. It's all about regime change in Iran, and the nuclear weapons are just a pretext, like WMDs in Iraq were a pretext to have regime change in Baghdad. So I think we're a long way from that. But even assuming the best scenario here, that both Washington and in Tehran, cooler heads are prevailing. I don't look at Bibi as having a cooler head, because if right now the Iranians are still pounding the Israelis pretty hard, and if there's a stand down, if there's a cooling off between the United States and Iran, how does that suit his purposes? Because he then comes out the big loser. He's the one who initiated this exchange with Iran, has got a devastated country now to thank for it, and still the regime in Iran is standing. And can he really tolerate that? So my guess is he would have some other things he can pull out of his bag of tricks to try to get, hey, you guys fight while I hold your coats and get the United States back in. So I wouldn't count him out by any means, because if he ends up with basically a stand down between the United States and Iran and the situation he's put his country in, I think his political future and maybe his personal future are very much in doubt. And I don't think he can tolerate that.
Yeah, it's always interesting how when the Knesset is on the verge of falling apart, Netanyahu is all of a sudden like, okay, we're going to, bomb this sovereign nation or start this next phase of the war. And it was interesting to see the fact that Trump has gotten so involved, right? The fact that the US has not only supported Israel in getting the war to this point, but that it also joined in on these direct strikes that we saw early Sunday. What do you make of that decision on behalf of the Trump administration? I mean, it's no secret that the US has wanted to do everything that they can to cripple Iran. They've wanted regime change for a while now, but we could be looking at a World War III type scenario if this keeps escalating.
That's correct. And also, from Trump's point of view, if he wants to have any kind of successful administration and doesn't want to end up like George W. Bush, just from that narrow perspective, he doesn't want this war to go forward. But, I get a little tired sometimes when people are commenting about, oh, Trump's being misled, he's listening to all the wrong people, et cetera, et cetera. If only it's official news, this wouldn't be happening. That's fine. That excuse only goes so far. He's surrounded by the wrong people because he wants the wrong people there. He wants to be told what he wants to hear, and maybe he shares those perspectives himself. So I'm not going to cut him much slack on that. That having been said, he must know this would destroy his administration. I think, however, that just like the rest of Washington, everything is dominated by this Manichaean point of view: Israel good, Iran bad, and that there's no middle ground. I mean, at least on on Ukraine and Russia, Trump feels the need and maybe the luxury of being able to say, "Well, I'm critical of Zelensky, and I can talk friendly toward Putin." He can't do that between Iran and Israel. Everything is black and white there. And he really has no wiggle room on that. He's really painted himself into a corner, which I think he's gone into that corner voluntarily. I don't know how he gets out of it at this point, because two things I think have to be kept in mind. Netanyahu's ability to mobilize Washington on his behalf is far and away greater than whatever Zelensky has, trying to drag us into his war. And secondarily, when all the chips are down, we can destroy Iran. We can't destroy Russia unless we want to commit suicide, but we can destroy Iran. And that's where the Iranians really have to play their cards carefully, because if they hit back at the Israelis very, very hard, at some point it's going to become clear that Israel did not go to all the trouble to get these nuclear weapons just to be destroyed by Iranian missiles. At some point, if they are in extremis, they will use those weapons, or at some point, maybe the Americans will. The Iranians need to take that into account.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because, I mean, we saw last week Israel's defense minister warning that Tehran would burn if Iran continued with its retaliatory attacks. And as we've seen, this has largely been an offensive war, right? It doesn't seem like we're seeing a lot of air defense. We are seeing both sides inflicting damage on each other. And the fact that we're seeing so much damage in Israel, right, stretching from Tel Aviv to Haifa and beyond, that has been, I think, a really big thing for Israel to have to contend with. This idea that, oh, the Iron Dome didn't just take care of everything. That raises my concerns, especially as we were talking about, with the US kind of being in a position of possibly wanting to back down, not wanting to get into World War III, that some of those genocidal right-wing maniacs in Israel look over and they go, okay, why don't we take this war up a notch? What are your concerns about Israel making this into a nuclear war?
That's right, and that's where Iran needs to think about what their desired end game is. Maybe it's similar to what Hezbollah managed back in 2006, where the Israelis have to stand down. You're still standing on the battlefield, which means effectively you're the winner. What all Iran has to do is really to survive here, because again, a regime change is the game plan from Israel and the United States, and that is frustrated. Objectively, they win. Do they want to go beyond that? Do they want to find some way to say to the Americans and the Israelis, okay, knock it off, no more attacks on Iran? At some point, do they decide, because of this and because the word of the United States cannot be trusted on anything anymore, that they need to acquire some nuclear weapons? I mean, if they're looking at the choice, hey, we can be Libya or we can be North Korea. If I were sitting in Tehran, I'd say I'd much rather be North Korea than Libya. If you get some nuclear weapons, you get respect. If you end up like Gaddafi, you end up with a much worse fate. So I think they're going to be thinking real hard about that too. So I don't know. I think this is still very open-ended where this thing may go.
Yeah, and that's an interesting factor here too, because going back to what you were saying about Gaddafi, I mean, he gave up his country's nuclear weapons program back in 2003, right? He tried to kind of play the game to go along with what the West wanted to a certain extent, and yet they still overthrew him. They still completely destroyed his country. It didn't seem to matter what he did versus North Korea's over here. Nobody's picking a fight with them right now, right? No one's bombing North Korea because we all know what capabilities they have and what they could do in retaliation. And when you look at the position that Iran is in after all of these years of dealing with sanctions, right, trying to do things the right way, trying to make sure that they were, under the cover of the non-proliferation treaty, that they were complying with the UN Charter and so on and so forth, they still get attacked. They're still being targeted with sanctions. And you still have the US president over here talking about regime change in Iran. That almost sends the message to Iran that, hey, you may as well create a nuclear weapon because it's the only thing at this point that is going to stop this onslaught from the West. Is that how you see it, or is there more to it?
I think there's more to it. But I think that's the calculus they have to go through. Now, the flip side of that is I don't think anybody in particular, including Iran's friends, Russia and China, don't particularly want to see Iran get a nuclear weapon, because then they know a lot of other countries, the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Turks, all sorts of other people will start getting nuclear weapons themselves. That would be a nightmare for the non-proliferation regime. Maybe it would have a stabilizing effect, like it's had a stabilizing effect on India and Pakistan. We really don't know. I think the more likely thing, though, is that, as we know, the Iranians, at least has been reported, had rejected an agreement with Moscow for an alliance, essentially like Moscow has with North Korea. And now the Iranian foreign minister is in Moscow now talking to President Putin. Maybe some kind of a security guarantee from Moscow will come out of that, which will be a reason that Iran says, we don't need to get nuclear weapons. We now have a guarantee from Moscow, in the same way that countries in Europe are under the NATO American nuclear umbrella. Again, this is so open-ended where this goes, but I think there are a couple of things we can draw from this. One is we are increasingly looking at a Eurasian war here, not just a separate Ukrainian war or a war in the Middle East. These are becoming two theaters in the same conflict. And thirdly, if anybody had any illusions about making a deal with the United States on Ukraine or anything else, that has to just go right out the window. It doesn't mean that the people involved don't have to tread very carefully, but the idea that somehow Trump's going to come to the table and he's going to dismantle the unipolar world and we're going to have spheres of influence and have some rational policy coming from Washington, that ain't going to happen. They may be able to make a little behind the scenes deal on this tit for tat kind of thing, but in terms of strategic arrangements with other countries, forget it.
Yeah, it's got to be very telling after everything that we went through with the way that the Trump administration handled the ceasefire and hostage release deal between Israel and Hamas, to now the way that they're handling ongoing talks between Russia and Ukraine, really Russia and the US. And you look at Iran and they're like, hey, we tried to talk with you, right? We wanted to make a deal and you pulled the rug out from under us at the last minute. helped Israel with this attack, and then you guys jumped in and attacked us. Yeah, it doesn't exactly seem like the US is the best country to negotiate with right now. And I did think that it was interesting because when you are looking at what Russia and China are doing, as you noted there, we heard from Russian President Putin back on Friday, and he specifically said that Russia and Iran are fighting the same forces, right? They're fighting, and he's meaning it's not just our individual wars, it is the West, it is the US that is trying to target the multipolar world. And now, when you look at what Russia and China are doing right now, in addition to both countries strongly condemning the US attacks on Iran, there have also been reports about Chinese cargo flights to Iran with speculation that they could be sending military related equipment, not confirmed. But then, as you also pointed out there, we have Russia's president meeting with Iran's foreign minister in Moscow today, where Putin condemned Israel's initial attack and made it clear that Russia stands with Iran. Do you think that the US is realizing what's at stake here and is kind of getting the message that is being sent from this meeting?
I don't know if they're capable of that, to tell the truth. It would require a level of strategic thinking that I don't think is to be found anywhere in this administration. As we know, Mr. Trump tends to be rather impulsive and narcissistic and transactional in his thinking. He tends to compartmentalize one thing from another. Who knows who he's actually listening to that has anything better in terms of strategic thinking? I just don't think it's there. I think they can only think short term. Put Ukraine on hold, get a ceasefire, move forward, crush Iran, get ready for a war with China. I think that's the only way they can look at the world. Now, Russia is in a somewhat different position. Obviously, their ability materially to help Iran is somewhat limited by the fact that they're engaged. They're a little busy right now with this war in Ukraine. I don't think they have a whole lot of air defense assets they can free for the Iranians. They also have, though, one advantage that the United States doesn't have. They can still talk to the other side. By all accounts, the relationship between Putin and Netanyahu has always been a pretty good personal relationship, that whatever agreement the Russians reach with the Iranians, the Russians can also talk to the Israelis and say, look, this is the deal, and we expect the other side to stick to it, and we will stick to it too. The Russians can do that. The Americans cannot. So I think there's a lot of leverage that Moscow has in this conflict that we don't have. How the Russians will use that, I don't really know. And again, a lot of that depends on how much Netanyahu is going to put his own political and personal interests before those of his country. And as we know, there are a lot of people in Israel that really hate him and would like to get rid of him. And frankly, I think it would be in everybody's interest.
Yeah, it's interesting when it comes to the role that Netanyahu is playing, right? The US loves a good fall guy, and he's almost the perfect one, right? Everything bad that has happened under his watch, you can just blame on him and then keep going and go on to the next guy who has very similar policies. And I know that that's really been in the conversation for the last couple of years, especially as you have Israel waging this genocidal campaign against the Palestinians, which obviously is still ongoing, although it's not getting mentioned as much in the headlines. But when it comes to the position that Israel is in, right, pushing and pursuing all of these regional wars and doing it all at once, and really what the US is capable of in terms of coming to their aid. How do you see that relationship right now? I mean, the US, as you noted there, they've got this proxy war with Russia. They really want a proxy war with China. Oh, and now they're dealing with direct war with Iran. Are they able to handle all of it without Israel kind of being the one that quite literally falls apart?
Can these guys walk and chew gum at the same time? I wouldn't count on it. I don't think they could even do chewing gum and walking in isolation, much less do them at the same time. So, this is a problem. The other thing is that is true of this conflict, or anything to do with Israel, that we don't have with respect to China or Russia, is that for a huge part of Trump's base, it's not just, the AIPAC and the Israel lobby and, Jewish money, Miriam Adelson and all that. It's all these Christian Zionists for whom this is an apocalyptic, absolute moral divine imperative to stand by Israel, which means anything Bibi wants, Bibi gets. I mean, when you saw that message that Ambassador Mike Huckabee sent to Trump, basically, telling him he was put there by God to act like Truman You couldn't get much closer to an implication that he needs to be using nuclear weapons on Iran than what Huckabee sent to Trump. That's extremely disturbing, because there are a lot of people who think, if you want to call such Looney Tune notions thinking, who think in those terms when it comes to anything that they believe threatens this divinely ordained state. It's really a problem that I don't think has a solution, certainly not in this administration.
Yeah, and it's also been interesting to see, too, the pushback that we have seen against Trump from his own base, right? Because a lot of people that voted for him, sure, they may have voted for him anyway because he was going up against Kamala Harris, but a big reason why he got so much of the support he did, especially from a lot of the more libertarian aligned Americans, was because he told them no new wars, right? He told them, I'm going to end the endless wars, bring peace to the Middle East, end the war in Ukraine. So far, not only has Trump done none of that, but now we have US bases in the Middle East that are being targeted. Well, not only would they not have been targeted if the US hadn't carried out these direct attacks on Iran, but we would not be in this position having this conversation going, okay, are we looking at World War III? How far are we going to get into this? So, what do you think that this means for Trump's credibility here at home with the American people?
Well, first off, I think it's good that you mentioned those bases and the fact that the Iranians do need to be very careful about incurring American casualties, because most Americans don't pay any attention to all the details. And all they know, if a bunch of Americans get killed, it'll be, hey, look what they did. They killed our people. We have to get revenge. I mean, with no context of how that might have come to pass and what responsibility our leaders have had in doing that. So the bloodlust will be up, and God knows what kind of atrocities, even apocalyptic atrocities, they would endorse. Yeah, back to Trump's base. This is really where we get a parting the ways between the real America first people who want what is best for America and thought Trump was going to deliver that for them, and what I hate to use the term, but it fits, the Trump tards, who basically will endorse anything and everything he does because he's God's anointed, orange Messiah, and that he can do no wrong. Promises made, promises kept. I don't know what you would do with that, but what that split does, and I think that split is developing, is in fact it's wide open, is that it splits whatever small hope was really left of reconstructing anything decent, solid, a foundation for what this country used to be, and what hopefully, if you want to make America great again, it ain't going to happen, because you're basically handing everything over to the extreme left, all those nutcases that we saw running around the Biden administration, who will be back. I mean, unless things stabilize very, very quickly, I think we're almost guaranteeing that the Democrats will take Congress in the next election, because Trump's base is split. And we'll see another impeachment of Trump, not having to do with this, some other Trump dump thing, if you will. And it'll just be further chaos for the rest of his administration.
Yeah, it's very telling here. And it's so interesting because just a few months ago, before Trump was in office, it was like, of course he won, right? It makes perfect sense that you look at the Biden administration, all of the issues that the American people had with them. It was no surprise to me whatsoever that Trump would win in a landslide. And now we're having this same conversation, just flipped, looking at Trump going, hey, you have it all. You are your own worst enemy at this point. And beyond that, you could be, well, really are at this point, dragging us into World War III. And, watching the way that this US attack on Iran played out, I'm watching it, and my first thought was the US intends to provoke a response. They want, exactly as you were saying there, for American soldiers to come home in body bags, and for the American people to see that and to suddenly think, oh, Iran is our enemy. Now we need to target them. And that goes back to this statement that Trump made on social media that I want to bring up really quick about regime change. He said it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? Now, first of all, the American people elected this president to make America great again. I don't know why he's over here so worried about Iran, but what do you make of the fact that he's saying it so out in the open at this point, really telling everyone this is what the US ultimately wants.
Well, I think it was Brian Berletic who said that Trump supposedly is playing interdimensional backgammon. No, I don't think he is. I think he's playing tic-tac-toe. And what you see is what you get. And I think that actually is the simplest explanation, which I may be resisting. And maybe they came in with this kind of a choreographed tag your it with the Iranians, knowing that the Iranians would respond in some way, and that it's sooner or later it's going to reach that point of escalation where Americans get killed, and then we do go in for the kill. Maybe it's as simple as that. I hope it isn't.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll bring up is just when it comes to the US handling of this overall propaganda war and how that is playing a role in Iran. Because it's been no secret that anytime there's any kind of protest in Iran over the years, the US is, really amplifying it with the media here, making it look like, oh, the Iranian government is on the outs. They're going to fall. If anything, it seems like we've almost kind of seen the opposite in Iran so far, right? They were the ones who were attacked first by Israel, then directly by the US. So now we've seen protest in Iran against the US, against Israel, and against all of these attacks. That's going to make them more loyal to their current government, as opposed to jumping on board for regime change and saying, okay, yeah, we're in favor of whatever the US is going to give us. It's hard to see that happening. Now, obviously, we just watched the Syrian government fall at the end of last year after so many years of the US targeting them. So, I can't say that it's not going to happen, but how do you view the situation that Iran is in right now and kind of what's at stake here for their government and really for their country as a whole?
Yeah, it's existential. I mean, we've used that term for Russia with respect to Ukraine. This is existential for Iran, and not just for this regime, for Iran. Because look, maybe Crown Prince Pahlavi has got his plane warmed up to get parachuted into Tehran, like we put Ahmed Chalabi into Baghdad. I think that's highly unlikely to happen. We don't have the ground troops to go into Iran the way we did into Iraq. And even with that, Iraq didn't turn out very well for us. And I think the fallback is, well, if we can't take over a state after regime change, we can sure wreck it. And Iraq is still a mess. Libya is a mess. Syria is a god-awful mess. And in one way, yeah, these people are rather linear. They stick to the plan. We destroy this state. We destroy that state. We destroy this state. Iran is next on the list. Is it possible we can destroy Iran, even if we can't replace the government? Can we cause such chaos there by choking off their economy, like we did with Syria's economy, by destroying selectively various targets in Iran? Maybe using nuclear weapons if we need to. There are minority groups. Iran is only about 60% ethnic Persians. You've got a lot of Baluchis, you got Kurds, you got Azeris, although the supreme leader himself is an Azeri. Maybe they figured that, well, if we can't take over Iran, we can at least wreck it and have it not be a functional state. That's good enough. And again, stick to the plan. Take these other pieces off the board, take the Iranians off the board, isolate the Russians and the Chinese, and then come after them in serial fashion. That's been the plan all along. And I don't know they have any reason not to keep Iran in their sights as the next target.
Yeah, it's very concerning when you look at all of the ways in which this lines up with this broader U.S. foreign policy plan that has been in place for a number of years, no matter the Republicans or Democrats that are in the White House. And there's certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Jim Jatras, a geopolitical analyst and former U.S. diplomat. Thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment. And as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanctioned. You can also check out Sanctioned over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank you all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.